Good evening and welcome to the launch of the 10th anniversary edition of the Best Australian Science Writing. We are also here for a special presentation of the Bragg Prizes for Science Writing. We celebrate these prizes every year in November when the book is published. We bring together remarkable scientists, journalists, authors and storytellers, and we amplify their work. Some of you have celebrated with us in previous years. Thank you for joining us again. I'm Kathy Bale, Chief Executive of UNSW Press, a company which is owned by the University of New South Wales. In past years, we have launched the book at the State Library and the Australian Museum in Sydney and our bookshop on campus here at UNSW. This year, we welcome you online from your homes, schools, universities, offices, or wherever you are connecting with us tonight. I am joining you this evening from the Kensington campus of UNSW, and we're on Bedigal country. I would like to acknowledge the Bedigal people and acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land on which we work. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. I recognise the continuing connections to traditional lands and cultures. At our university press, we publish distinctive non-fiction books about Australia, its history, its culture, and its place in the world. We have been publishing the Best Australian Science Writing for 10 years, along with other books by top scientists and writers keen to reach a global readership. There is exceptional scientific research taking place in Australian universities. This is the night when we recognise the achievements of those writers who can decipher complex research papers and findings. With their narratives, writers can capture the imagination of a broader community. We first published the Best Australian Science Writing in 2011 in our New South imprint. Stephen Pincock edited the first collection, and since then we have had the privilege to work with Elizabeth Finkel, Jane McCready, Natasha Mitchell, Ashley Hay, Joe Chandler, Michael Slezak, John Pickrell, Bianca Nogrady, and the editor of this year's book, Sarah Phillips. A special welcome to the editors and to all the contributors to the Best Australian Science Writing. Since 2012, UNSW Press has awarded prizes for the best non-fiction stories on science written for a general audience. We call them the Braggs. The prizes are named in honour of the father and son team who won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1915, William and Lawrence Bragg. They valued clear communication of developments in science, and that's what we strive for too in this publishing and educational project. In 2015, we launched a category of the prize for secondary school students in years 7 to 10, and this is done in partnership with Refraction Media. We appoint advisory and judging panels for the book and the Bragg Prizes. The advisory panel includes Professor Merlin Crosley, Deputy Vice-Chancellor at Academic at UNSW, and Merlin is the Chairman of UNSW Press. This science, education and communication project is done in partnership with UNSW Science. It is also generously supported by the Copyright Agency. I acknowledge the Director of its Cultural Fund, Nicola Evans, Chief Executive Adam Suckling, and Chairman Kim Williams. Briefly, this is what we've got coming up for you next this evening. You will hear from Nobel laureate Peter Doherty, who wrote the foreword to the Best Australian Science Writing this year. This is a recorded conversation with Professor Emma Johnson, Dean of Science at UNSW. Emma will then announce the Bragg Prize winners. The winner of the Student Prize will be joining us online. This segment will be followed by a panel discussion with two prize winners led by editor Sarah Phillips. Settle in and get ready to raise your glasses later when the 2020 prizes are announced. For now, I'd like to introduce Peter Doherty. As many of you know, Professor Doherty shared the 1996 Nobel Prize for Medicine. This recognised discoveries about transplantation and killer T-cell mediated immunity. Still active in research on immunity, he spends most of his professional time at the Doherty Institute at the University of Melbourne. Apart from his scientific journal output, he is the author of several books, including Sentinel Chickens, Pandemics, What Everyone Needs to Know, and The Knowledge Wars. Many of us have been paying careful attention to Peter Doherty's comments on infection and immunity during this pandemic year. If you haven't read it, you can find his column Setting It Straight on the Doherty Institute website. Peter Doherty launched the Best Australian Science Writing back in 2011 and has always encouraged and inspired contributions to this science writing project. We are very grateful he has returned in 2020 to contribute the foreword and officially launch the 10th anniversary edition. Here he is in conversation with Emma Johnson, Professor of Marine Ecology at UNSW.
Peter, thanks for joining us. You launched the very first edition of the Best Australian Science Writing way back a decade ago. A lot has changed since then, and we're now in the midst of a pandemic. How do you think the way that our scientists and our science communicators try and transfer their knowledge has changed over that decade? Have you noticed any patterns?
Well, of course, if you're talking about changes in science communication, we're talking about the change in communication, which over that decade has really been massive with access to online formats, growth of things like YouTube and so forth, which we didn't have, I think, a decade ago, as far as I recall. So science communication has become enormously powerful and can be extremely visual as well as writing. But I think writing is still very important, because it gives you need long form writing to really get across complex ideas. Some science you can get across extremely well visually, but it's also important to write. And so the Australian science writing from University of New South Wales has been a real contribution over the last decade, and certainly has a real place in science communication in Australia.
That's right, and we're launching tonight a series that's been going for some time. It's very popular, but it is long form. And so arguably it's targeting a particular group of people, a demographic that has a certain level of education. In your foreword, you argue that, well-educated goes well beyond university-trained people. Can you tell us a bit more about how you define education and, what you look for?
I think education comes in all sorts of forms. For instance, over the years, I've got to know Lindsay Fox a little bit, the trucking magnate. Now, Lindsay left school pretty early and built his business. But he's, in a sense, an educated and informed person, very aware of issues and societal issues and so forth. Whether that's changed over the decades or not, I don't know. I've, for various reasons, been reading through 30 letters that my uncle wrote back from Malaya during World War II. I didn't meet him because he didn't survive the war. But here's a man who left school at 15, who wrote a literate, informed letter and was interested in ideas. And that they're the sort of men and women that I grew up around. I'm 80 years old now. So whether that's changed or not, I'm not sure. I'm not a sociologist. I'm a lab scientist. But I think there's a general interest in ideas and trying to understand on the part of those people who have that type of curiosity. I'm not sure whether curiosity is something we learn. We certainly all have it as children, I think. Some of us seem to retain it more.
You do argue that to be effective science communicators, we need to encourage curiosity, encourage interrogation of the natural world, and indeed citizen science. Have you seen that progressing over the years, engagement?
Oh, I think so. I think the engagement in citizen science has been ramping up because people, often older people, but not just older people, often have more time. I think we're all starting to understand a lot better because of the climate change issue, the bushfires and so forth, just how important our natural environment is. And more people are engaging with that. And sometimes their engagement is a bit of a sort of a techie, nerdy thing due to wanting to fly drones around or loving to use your camera on your iPhone or these things, which can be enormously powerful in reporting back data and information to say groups that are organized to process that data and handle it. So we're seeing a lot of these volunteer type activities, flying drones along the coast at the same time at regular intervals to monitor, say, what's happening with sand and water, all this sort of thing. I think that's extremely intriguing. It's a lot of fun and anyone can do it. It needs, if possible, to be signed up with some organization that can actually handle data. That helps a lot. But I think we'll see more and more of this. And part of my job, I guess, is having a bit of prominence, is just to try and introduce people to the idea, to the possibility, if they haven't picked up on it themselves.
As a natural scientist myself, I've seen that transformation via the technology, but also engagement of citizens. And
Yes.
it's an excellent way to get people more interested in the natural world. Now, interest in science and medicine in particular has blossomed this year. We, under the situation of the pandemic, and indeed in Australia, we've seen a huge interest from not only the public, but also from politicians in really listening to quite complicated, hard evidence coming from our medics, our epidemiologists. Some epidemiologists are now super famous as a result. What do you think it is about the Australian community, our social norms, et cetera, that have allowed us to listen so hard? And is there anything we can hold on to from this pandemic about the prominence of evidence in our decision making?
Yes, I mean, we get into trouble with politicians and evidence at times in the climate science area, particularly because it's such an enormous economic and problem for us with respect to fossil fuels. But there's never been that tension with the medical sciences. Medical sciences in Australia have always done reasonably well with politics. They can be neglected at times depending on the interests of politicians, but there's never been outright hostility to medical science. That's been a bit different, say, in the United States, where for some of the religious conservatives, science is deeply threatening for all sorts of reasons. They still challenge evolution, for instance, and so forth. So not so friendly, but in the political sphere, really quite friendly from both sides of politics in the USA as well. So it's not surprising that medical science has been taken up substantially within the political community here because they've always been kind of interested, though not necessarily very familiar with it. And in tackling infectious disease, we have a good history, going back to how we handled the AIDS pandemic. We had great bipartisanship, and we handled that much, much better than countries like the United States, and have continued to do so. And I think we can congratulate all our political leaders, from the Prime Minister, the Premiers, and various ministers, particularly Health Minister Greg Hunt's been very powerful in doing the right thing on the response to this pandemic. Evidence-based and really terrific.
Do you think there's anything that science communicators or scientists themselves can learn from how medicos and epidemiologists are communicating so effectively, or do you think it really comes down to best interest economics?
I think to some extent it's because everyone's interested, because everyone feels to some extent threatened by this and wants to get out of it. And so it's getting a good hearing. There's been a bit of kickback, of course, because of the terrible social and economic consequences of some of this, though our government, again, has done very well. It's not perfect, but it's done very well in helping people get through that. And part of the chaos in the United States has been due to the fact there really hasn't been economic support at the sort of level we've had here. But I think it's been extremely well handled, and it shows what we're capable of doing. And I think what we need to do is, say with climate change, is start that transition process. If we're going to have to go through a period of gas, well, maybe we have to, but I think the chief scientist, Alan Finkel, has really been pushing this hydrogen possibility. I think that's a great way to go. So I would like to see us making a lot of real progress on this front and in the political sphere, though I think it's much more difficult for one side of politics than the other.
So before we formally launch the book, thanks again for your time today. And I just wanted to chat to you a little bit about your writing this year. I understand you've been writing a weekly column which is called Setting It Straight. Yes. Can you tell us what you're aiming to do with that, and are you going to turn it into a book?
Yes, the Setting It Straight. We're now up to number 32, I think, in 800 to 1,000 word essays that are going up on our website. I talk about them as our weekly sermons. I was brought up in a sort of fundamentalist Methodism, so I'm a bit into sermonizing and a bit evangelical at times. And it's hard work, actually. Much easier to write 1,500 words than 1,000 words, quite frankly. And it's been my first experience of being a columnist. That series, we're going to close out the first part of it at the end of January. I'm already signed up with a book contract for it. I have to write some additional stuff around it. Also incorporating some other stuff I've been doing this year that's kind of been fun and very different. That's more on the personal sociological front. I have to write those chapters, but the chapters are basically about science and COVID science.
Thank you again, Peter. We really appreciate, on behalf of UNSW Science, on behalf of UNSW Press, you joining us for a decade-long project, which we hope will last for many decades. So if I can now invite you to formally launch the Best Australian Science Writing for 2020.
Well, it gives me great pleasure to introduce and launch Best Australian Science Writing for 2020. This comes as a significant tradition now, and it's a very good volume, and I had the privilege of writing a foreword to it, which I enjoy doing because it's so much in our consciousness at the moment. Everyone's conscious of what's happening with science. And I'd also like to congratulate the winners of the Bragg Prize for Science Writing, named after, I guess, two other Nobel Prize winners with an Australian connection to Adelaide. I think it's great that we have great science writers. It's a difficult space at the moment, we know, because of the issues with print communication and all the rest of it. But we need great Australian science writing, and we need that long form writing in books.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome to this wonderful celebration. As you've just heard from our Nobel laureate and the writer of our foreword, Peter Doherty, 2020 has been a challenging year for all of us, and it has presented some extra special challenges for university communities. So I cannot tell you how pleased I am to be able to continue UNSW science support for the Best Australian Science Writing Compendium, and to be able to join you this evening across the ether to celebrate and hear from our country's leading science writers. Together we can reflect this evening on the importance of the work our colleagues are undertaking every day every day around Australia and around the world, finding solutions to the many theoretical and practical problems society faces, as well as the serious existential challenges. Even though as a community we continue to be tested, it really has become evident this year that more than ever the world is paying attention to science. And I am exceptionally proud of our UNSW Science faculty in 2020 for contributing to the many ongoing public discussions, but also because our ethos of collaboration, exploration, innovation and accomplishment has withstood the challenges that 2020 has thrown us. I think it's our innate passion for rigorous education and research, combined with our unwavering dedication to diversity and inclusion, that have been essential to this success in 2020, helping us to continue to produce robust, credible and pioneering science of global impact during a global pandemic. We just haven't slowed down. We're also proud to have been able to continue to train the next generation of scientists on and off campus, and we look forward to welcoming even more people from all over the world back to our laboratories, back to our student societies, our games and our tutorials on campus in 2021. And now, on to the business of the evening. I have it here. The shortlist for the UNSW Press Bragg Prize for Science Writing 2020 was announced online in October. So congratulations to the 6 shortlisted writers. I'll list them now. Ceridwen Dovey, whose story True Grit was originally published in Wired. Ricky French, whose story Case of the Missing Frogs was originally published in the Weekend Australian magazine. Leslie Hughes, whose story The Milk of Human Genius was originally published in The Monthly. Donna Liu, whose story Stranger Things was originally published in New Scientist. Conrad Marshall, whose story Jeepers Creepers was originally published in The Good Weekend. And Nikki Phillips, whose story Bringing Home the Ancestors was originally published in Nature. You can read all these excellent stories in the Best Australian Science Writing 2020. But before I announce the winner of the Bragg Prize, I would like to acknowledge this year's judges for reading entries that covered diverse scientific subjects and for their informed comments on each contribution to the 2020 edition of the book. Thank you to Professor Jodie Bradbury, Professor Helene Marsh, Professor Merlin Crossley, Professor Matthew England, and editor Sarah Phillips for your commitment to this project in a very busy year. The 2020 the best non-fiction piece on science written for a general audience. The articles must be less than 7,000 words, and the judges are looking for writing about science that is honest and rigorous about the research that underpins it. There are 2 runners-up prizes. Each receives $1,500. And this year, the runners-up prizes are awarded to Conrad Marshall and Ricky French. The judges said that Jeepers Creepers by Conrad Marshall reveals how hard it is to track down the causative agent of a disease. The story is a bit like a horror movie, disgusting and scary. It is a rollicking read that explores the concept of uncertainty in science. Doubt, dead ends, and competing scientific ideas are all presented fairly with vivid descriptions of a horrifying disease. The judges said that Case of the Missing Frogs by Ricky French is a narrative of a project to save Australia's disappearing frogs from extinction. This story also shares the lonely toil of a scientist struggling with their next grant application and the enormity of such a burden. In some ways, this is a historical story, but it also includes so many new things: selective breeding via genomics, citizen science with Frog ID, together with the age-old challenge of getting new ideas accepted, particularly if you're a minor non-establishment player. And the winner of the UNSW Press Bragg Prize for Science Writing receives $7,000. I am delighted to announce that the winner in 2020 is Ceridwen Dovey for her story, True Grit. The judges said that True Grit by Ceridwen Dovey masterfully balances detailed scientific exploration with humanity and pathos. The research is thorough and the writing is lyrical. It is a poignant profile of Brian O'Brien, a remarkable man whose research on moon dust was forgotten for so long. This story is also a tribute. Professor Brian O'Brien passed away in August this year at the age of 86. Yet his story lives on in this award to an author who was fascinated by O'Brien's scientific work and his personal resilience. Ceridwen Dovey has a special interest in social and environmental justice in outer space. She is the author of several works of fiction, including Bloodkin, Only the Animals, In the Garden of the Fugitives, and Life After Truth. Her works of non-fiction include Inner Worlds, Outer Spaces, The Working Lives of Others. Congratulations to the prize winners, who we will be hearing from very soon. Now, this is the 6th year that UNSW has hosted a special category of the Bragg Prize for secondary school students. A special welcome to all the science enthusiasts joining us online tonight from schools around the country. For the 2020 competition, students in years 7 to 10 were invited to write an 800-word essay on the big ideas saving the planet. We asked them to identify and discuss a problem that is yet to be solved by contemporary science and technology. This year's winners of the Bragg Student Prize for Science Writing have been selected from a competitive field of entries from across Australia. 2 runners-up each receive a $250 UNSW bookshop voucher and publication of their essays on the Careers with STEM website. They are Philippe Mouard at Georges River Grammar School, New South Wales, for his essay Stem Cells, Little Cells, Big Possibilities, and Jeremy Simonetto at St Patrick's College, New South Wales, for his essay IPS Cells, The Stem Cells of the Future. The winner of the Bragg Student Prize receives a $500 UNSW bookshop voucher and publication of their essay on the Careers with STEM website. They also have their winning essay published in the following year's edition of the Best Australian Science Writing. The winner of the 2020 Bragg Student Prize for Science Writing is Elena Canty for her essay, Cultured Meat, The Future of Food. In her response to the theme, The Big Ideas, Saving the Planet, the Year 9 student at Ivanhoe Girls Grammar School in Victoria explores the ecological benefits of lab-grown meat. One of the 2020 judges and a teacher at Moriah College in Sydney, Stephanie Schwartz, said, Elena Canty has chosen a topic that is very current and one which she obviously feels has the potential to significantly impact our future. Her essay is well written, allowing her to present her argument clearly, supported by relevant statistics without drowning us in too much detail. Congratulations, Elena Canty, who we will now hear from in a recently recorded message.
I would like to thank the University of New South Wales, New South Publishing, Refraction Media, and Careers with STEM for offering the amazing opportunity that is the Bragg Student Prize for Science Writing. I'm so grateful for being chosen as this year's winner, and I'm honoured to be recognised tonight alongside these incredible science writers. The theme for this year's prize, The Big Ideas Saving the Planet, inspired me to explore a possible solution to the problems currently associated with livestock farming. I decided to write about cultured or lab-grown meat because it could revolutionise the way we produce food, making that much more sustainable and ethical, and because although the technology is not quite ready yet, it could realistically become part of our everyday lives within a few years. Although I love reading science articles and essays, I had never actually tried writing one before. The Bragg Student Prize encouraged me to give it a go, and I'm so glad that I did, because now I've realised a passion for science writing which I might not have discovered otherwise. I do hope to pursue science in university and beyond that as a career, although at the moment I'm still exploring my options because I don't yet know which area I find most interesting. While researching and writing my essay, I enjoyed learning about many scientific developments that hold the potential to improve our society, and it was great to see so much hope for a better future for our planet. Thank you.
I hope Elena Canty's presentation gave you a sense of the high standard of entries from school students this year. Congratulations to Elena and to our 2 runners-up. The winning stories are available online, including the Careers with STEM website. And as Emma mentioned, you can read them in the Best Australian Science Writing. Thank you all to all of the students around the country who entered the competition this year and tried to identify and discuss all those problems yet to be solved by contemporary science and technology. You came up with some inspiring responses, and we're looking forward to hearing from you next year again. Thank you to the teachers who encouraged and guided their classes to grapple with some of these big ideas. Congratulations too to the 2020 Bragg Prize winner, author Keridun Dovey. Once you've read her piece in the Best Australian Science Writing, I recommend you seek out her other stories and her novels. Congratulations to Ricky French and Conrad Marshall for their captivating stories. We recently recorded a discussion with editor Sarah Phillips, Keridun Dovey, and Conrad Marshall. You won't be surprised to hear they had a lot to talk about. So while this segment is edited, this next segment is edited for this event, you'll find an extended version on the UNSW Science website soon.
Of research, and I think that's the only way I can get a handle on the material. And then what I really love to do is to sort of take that journey, which is often quite unpleasant for me, and I'm in a place of discomfort because I'm so far out of my comfort zone, but then coming out the other side of it and putting it down in very clear and accessible language that any non-expert could then understand and be able to participate in that story and understand exactly what the stakes are.
I feel that Over Researchers Anonymous would be an excellent self-help group, and most science journalists would probably join up to this self-help group. Now, Conrad, I am broadcasting to you from Bunurong country, which is otherwise known as the Mornington Peninsula, which is the source of your story. Now, how did you happen upon the whole Buruli ulcer?
It was one of those stories that was covered in depth in the newspapers, really. So there were just these daily reports about case numbers going up and tracking upwards over a number of years. And yet there was all this sort of mystery around where it had come from and why it was affecting certain people and not others, and what was the carrier, what was the vector, and when would it stop? Would it just continue to flare up? And I'm just lucky, I guess, in that, I get to write for Good Weekend, write long form pieces that can delve into topics a little bit more than those daily stories. So I have that luxury of sort of being able to go out and speak to everybody that's impacted by the ulcer, to all of the scientists that are studying it. I was able to go out with Paul Johnson and Tim Stenier on one of their sort of scientific gathering expeditions where they walk around the suburbs, or rather ride around the suburbs, picking up possum poo that they can then test later for Buruli. I was able to go to one doctor's grand round that he was presenting to staff at the Alfred Hospital. And through doing all of those things, I think you can sort of describe little scenes and create little moments of pause in the story, so that it's not just a sort of straight discussion of the problem. You're actually transporting the reader somewhere. I like to try to write atmospherically wherever I can, and just create those moments that the reader can enjoy.
Something that I really appreciated in what you produced, Conrad, was the element of uncertainty and just the mystery of the thing, and how you dealt with the fact that there was no answer. that ultimately we still don't know. And how did you approach this as a problem? Because often we're reporting on things that science has discovered, and everyone's like, oh, aren't science clever people? They've discovered this thing. But you were actually reporting on a situation where the scientists really just didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was part of the allure and sort of charm of the story, really, is that it is a mystery. It becomes a sort of, you feel like a detective on the case, sort of tracking down the answer, and then to find that there is no answer is okay in its own sense as well, because you begin to realize after meeting all these people, whether you're going out picking up possum poo or going to some secure CSIRO facility, that there are all these brilliant people that are on the case trying to come up with the answers. And what was really stunning for me in this case was that they were all collaborative as well. They were there were black sheeps, there were people that had disagreements on various elements around the Bernoulli ulcer, but for the most part, it was this really intensive sort of collaborative effort, and they were certainly all very keen to acknowledge the work that the other had done.
It's almost like a buddy movie, but in science. And that was something I really appreciated, clinging on to this narrative of in the murky depths of all the other, moon dust science and space science that was sometimes hard for me to understand. But the sense that there was this guy, Brian O'Brien, and he'd had this passion for trying to understand how moon dust actually behaved on the moon. No one listened to him at the time, even though, he was there working and had his experiment put up on the moon in one of the first Apollo missions. And no one else was, we're putting these things up there, maybe we should actually see if we can detect dust and then even look at how it might behave. So I really want people to just think a little bit harder about the kinds of science that we're doing in space, and also the attitudes that we are bringing to it and the ethics behind it, because I think it's a bit of a blind spot in terms of the boosterism that we all are subjected to when it comes to, private companies going into space, and they just expect us to, stand there and applaud and not have our critical thinking on, and not have that accountability and those checks and balances to know exactly what they're doing on the surface of the moon, for example.
Now, Kerenswin, you, as you noted at the beginning, you don't have a background in the harder sciences. Anthropology, I think, is your background. But a lot of the writing you do is science, and you also do fiction as well, and other sorts of essays. But what draws you so much to science? Like, why science journalism for you?
I'm still trying to answer that question to myself. It seems very strange to me that I've ended up as a science journalist in a way. But I think I've also come to terms with, there's so many different kinds of science writing. And so I've begun to see that in my fiction, I'm processing some of the same, ethical questions, the idea of what we're responsible for what we create, the human element to science, the sociology of science. Again, just delving beyond the narratives that we are fed about science as a kind of heroic, pristine activity, and actually looking at the human messiness and some of the harm, caused behind it, and some of the thinking that we need to, step back from if we're going to keep doing science in a responsible way.
All of the different people that I spoke to for the story on Bernoulli were approaching it in completely different ways, but they were having these very narrow sort of experiences day to day. I also find that they have a lot of humour, and maybe that's a consequence of what it is that they do, wearing the white lab coats and being in there focused on beakers or whatever it is. I think it kind of tends to breed a sort of great sense of humour in them. And I tried to actually put quite a bit of humour into the story, and I think I generally do in most of the scientific stories.
Do we need some step of remove from the science, or should science journalists be more embedded in the actual engine of discovery?
I think it's that. I think the remove is helpful. Also in terms of just keeping your impartiality, sort of intact, even if it's not that kind of a, investigative piece. I think it's more the reverse. I think that scientists need better ethics and communication training that should be baked into their degrees.
Well, I think we're going to have to wrap it up there, but thank you both very much for your time, and congratulations again on winning the Bragg Prize, Keridwen, and coming runner-up, Conrad, and also to Ricky French, who couldn't join us. Some superb examples of science journalism there, and also in the Best Australian Science Writing of 2020. Thank you both again for joining us.
Welcome back to our studio here at UNSW on Bedegal Country. If you cross paths with any of our writers in future, do ask them to sign a copy of the Best Australian Science Writing for you. This project involves contributions from hundreds of people. I'd like to thank some of them in particular. Sarah Phillips made an excellent selection of articles for this year's edition of the book. She was assisted by an eminent advisory panel of scientists, Professor Merlin Crosley, Matthew England, Scientia Professor of Climate Dynamics at UNSW, Helene Marsh, Distinguished Professor of Environmental Science at James Cook University, and Professor Jodie Bradby, a physicist at ANU. Thanks to the team at Refraction Media, especially Karen Taylor and Heather Catchpole. Heather judged the Bragg Student Prize with Stephanie Schwartz, a teacher at Moriah College in Sydney. Astrophysicist and champion of women in STEM, Professor Lisa Harvey-Smith, and Sarah Phillips was involved too. Thanks again to this year's contributors to the Best Australian Science Writing. You're all here. You inspire and encourage all of us to engage with the scientific issues of our time. The book is available in your favourite bookshops around the world, including our very own UNSW bookshop. You can also get the 2020 collection in all ebook formats. Thanks again to the Copyright Agency for recognising what great science writing can achieve, especially in an unsettling year like this one. Thanks to Professor Emma Johnson and the team at UNSW Science for their engagement with the project in a demanding year for the university sector. Thank you to all my colleagues at UNSW Press and New South, especially the team for this project, Emma Hutchinson, Harriet McInerney, Jemana Awad, Rosie Marson, and Josephine Pager-Marcus. There is one more announcement which is customary to make on this occasion. We have invited Melbourne-based science journalist Diani Lewis to edit the 2021 edition of the Best Australian Science Writing. She'll be inviting contributions to the collection and encouraging Bragg Prize entries from next month. So that's in a few days, and it's open into the new year until the end of March. You'll find more information on the New South website in the coming weeks. Thank you all for joining us for this special occasion. Hope the Best Australian Science Writing kicks off your summer reading and kicks off your holiday season. Yay, thanks for joining us.